Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.
Good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And Matt, this week we got a really cool subject. Our topic is Tom Savini Kills. And Tom Savini is a character we've talked about many times through the course of this show for his groundbreaking special effects work. Really a superstar of the Fangoria era with, the nickname the Sultan of Splatter. Big fan of practical effects, as I know you are, and you can't get any better than Tom Savini. So we're going to celebrate some of his best work tonight.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about horror movies, I mean, this attracted me since I was a child, is the illusion of practical effects. I've always really enjoyed it. I've always, every time I've watched a horror movie and I see something gory happen, I've always stopped it, rewound it, we watched it again, paused it at certain moments, and I've just always been fascinated with how they do this, this magician's work with camera, and how they can make something so visceral and realistic looking. And Tom Savini is the godfather of that. And so it's awesome to just watch his work and watch his films and watch what he did at such an early stage in film and see how it kind of transcended over time.
And it's funny, being a fan of his movies and being a fan of, you got to start with George Romero, fellow Pittsburgh native. And he started working with him on the film Martin. And as you follow their shared career, and you can see the enhancement. He was always working on his craft. He was always improving his craft. And in fact, I would one of the movies we're going to look at tonight is in the Dead series. And if you look at the makeup and blood effects of Dawn of the Dead from 1978, and then you look at the makeup and blood effects from Day of the Dead from 1985, the difference is dramatic, and he did both work. So he really continued to hone and improve his craft over time, which is something you always admire.
Yeah, and exactly. What you just said about admiring it, you see someone just constantly improving. It wasn't just a one and done type thing. Like this, like Tom Savini was able to just constantly evolve and evolve into the business. And he ended up I believe he had a Tom Savini School of Special Effects or Practical Effects out in LA or something like that.
It's in Madison, Pennsylvania. It's the Tom Savini Special Makeup Effects Program at the Douglas Education Center in Madison, Pennsylvania. And he's pretty much stepped back from doing any movie work at this point. He makes some cameos here and there. And it's always cool when he pops up. He just brings a smile to my face. But when he gets new work offers, he often refers them to his students from his school, which is, again, just really cool. He was the subject of an outstanding documentary on his life, Smoke and Mirrors, which I highly recommend. It was outstanding.
Yeah, you recommended that to me. I loved it.
Yeah. He's also a stunt man and a very, very cool actor. I was lucky enough to, I don't want to say meet, implying like we were friends or anything, but I encountered him as a teenager at a horror convention. And I spoke with him, and he did some demos, and he signed a Dawn of the Dead Betamax cover for me.
Betamax.
And I always got the impression, whatever movie he's in, he's always the coolest guy on screen. And I think that's because in real life, he's the coolest guy you're going to meet. He just is that guy.
His personality just comes through. When you see him in a scene, you're just like, that's him. It's not even so much he's acting. He's a great actor, but you could just see his personality come through, and then knowing he's involved with the whole movie and all special effects just makes it way cooler. That's the guy who's doing all the special effects too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you could argue, who the greatest is, and you got, Dick Smith, of course, was a pioneer for all the modern special effects guys, and Rick Baker with some of his
werewolf and stuff.
But I think I would argue through his work on Romero's movies and through the slasher craze of the late 70s, early 80s, Tom Savini is probably the most influential.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, going back to him having a school, he also passed down this craft. He's like, here's all the things I learned. When you watch that documentary, he was the kind of guy that would improvise. He'd be like, all right, we've got tinfoil and a Band-Aid and some syrup. Like, we're going to do this thing. Like we have to hurry up and do it. And he would just make it happen. Like, he would just take tools and take things around that like no one would ever think. He was an engineer, right?
Yeah.
He was a special effects engineer, and he was just had that genius mind that was able to put things together on a cheap budget that no one else could do.
Yeah, perfect description. Absolutely. We're going to start. Our first film we're going to look at tonight is Maniac from 1980, directed by William Lustig. And William Lustig had got his start in adult films and used the profits from his most recent adult film success to make this film. And what I admire about this film the most is if you read about how it was made and some of the things they went through, and we'll talk about as we get into some specific scenes, but this is ground floor guerrilla filmmaking. They're shooting in New York City streets with no permit, and they're getting their shot and packing up and taking off before they get in trouble. And it's just like, you just love that kind of renegade filmmaking.
Yeah, and it shows when you're watching the movie. It definitely has a very gritty, grimy feel to it. Not just the special effects, just everything, just like the way he's sweating in his apartment, or it's the nighttime. You see like that New York City early '80s like steam coming up from the back alley or something like that, and it was just real New York City shots. It was really well done, and I had never seen this movie. I'd always seen. I remember as a kid, I'd always see it at like the VHS at the Blockbuster or whatever, and I'd always saw it, and I was like, I just never watched it. And I was actually really glad I did watch it this week, because this movie feels like it was way ahead of its time.
I totally agree. And I think this movie had a reputation for, and there's a couple things about it that stand out to me. Based on William Lustig's background, it's sleazy. It feels sleazy. It looks sleazy. You can see that it's borderline, pornographic, and it's nice. Not that there's nudity, or not that that there's a lot of sex or anything, but just the tone and the feel.
Yeah, just the things he says. Yeah.
And the second thing is, this is way deeper and more intelligent than just a random slasher. And Joe Spinell, the actor who plays the main character, Frank Zito, is perfectly demented and sleazy in this role. I can't imagine anybody else. The acting that he pulled off, I thought was fantastic.
I agree. At one point I'm watching this, I was like, did he win an Oscar for this? Like, I mean, I know obviously he didn't, but you're watching it and you're just like, this is the stuff that was going on with like Jeffrey Dahmer and all these people. Like, we see these Netflix documentaries of these like serial killers now, and we're like, no way. And then we go back, you go back 40 years to this movie, and it's like they were already kind of portraying that they had an idea. You know what I mean? Like, they portrayed a maniac serial killer perfectly in this movie.
Yep. Yeah, I think at the time it was kind of like reviled and it was disgusting. And as time went on, as we often do, we look back and say, you know what? This was a pretty clever and insightful piece of filmmaking that, really is elevated beyond its basic budget and some of the limitations it had. It's really well done.
And you said a word that I put in my notes when I was taking my notes, watching the movie. I wrote intelligent. And you just said this movie was just intelligently done. Like, even like the scenes when he's pretending to be a painter, and like, the character has it's fluid character. He's able to be this like absolute psychopath talking to himself on a bed with a mannequin, but then also hold like a regular conversation with someone. So that the acting and the script was just phenomenal.
We start with a couple on the beach laying, in a blanket, and we see someone's watching them. And the man gets up to go get firewood. And we get and again, we're going to focus on Tom Savini's work here. We get a nice, clean, well done throat slit, and then when the man comes back, we get him hung by wire through his neck, and we get to see it work its way through and slice, and relatively simple effects for Tom Savini, but both clean and perfectly done. We cut back to our main character, Frank Zito, who wakes up in bed almost like it was a nightmare. But we hear from news reports later on, and we know it wasn't a nightmare.
Right. He's like looking at the scars in his mirror and stuff like that. And there's just all sorts of stuff going on.
Yeah, his apartment is just filled with dolls and mannequins and a picture of what we assume to be his mom. And he's standing in a mirror with not an attractive figure of a man. And he's got scars on him. He's kind of squeezing his own scars on his breast, and he's like I say, he's just perfectly demented in this role.
Yeah.
He's walking the streets of New York City and is approached by a prostitute, and he goes up into the hotel room with her, and they start kissing, which I found weird and cringy. But in the middle of their encounter, he snaps, and he just starts choking her, and she's screaming, and he's just wringing the life out of her. And as there's a great camera shot up from her perspective, and this to me encapsulated how good he was in this role. He's sweating. His eyes are bulging like he's being choked. And it's just like, what a madman.
Yeah, like he's getting off on this, right? That's kind of the implication. Yeah.
And then we see it cuts in and he's imagining what appears to be his mother is actually, is who he's imagining this is happening to.
Yeah, and there's a huge Freudian thing going on in this whole movie.
Very much. He finishes and he goes and vomits in the sink and he talks to mommy. And you'd think, well, geez, he's really sorry for what he did, but he scalps the woman again, very, very clean cut, and peels her scalp back and takes it.
It's nice and slow. It's there's nothing like Tom Savini. No one did it like him, even to this day. Like you see the way he does those kills, you're like, oh man, he just went for it. Like you really think as a person, like it is. That's the way he did it. He was able to pull these magic tricks off. It was amazing.
Yeah, and you go back, this is early in his career, and this is on a low budget, and I think that makes it all the more impressive.
Can you imagine if they just thrown budgets at him and said, "Here's $10 million, go to town"?
When you see in some of his later work, like Creep Show, where he's designing animatronics and puppets, and I mentioned he hadn't really done a lot of work in the last 12 years. He's kind of retired. He did design the grabber mask from the Black Phone from 2023. So his creative genius, really doesn't
I
stop.
didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that he designed that. That's awesome.
Yep, they just say, hey, you got any ideas? Like, yeah, I got something. And,
I got a billion of them.
And it was fantastic. So at home, Frank puts the scalp on one of his mannequins and he nails it on, and he carries on a conversation with himself as if he's two different people.
Very, very much like Psycho. Like we see a lot of Psycho in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Particularly the Freudian overtones, but he goes out. He leaves and he goes out on the town, and we get a real shaky sky cam, a camera shot from the skyline of New York City, and all I could picture was a small helicopter in a windstorm, because it's just like vibrating as the camera goes, and I'm like, okay, that's a little shaky, but
yeah.
He sees a couple leaving a club, and one of the man of the couple is Tom Savini himself.
Yeah,
and he's all
being
dressed
real
up
cheesy,
and dapper, and they're leaving a disco, I think.
He's a sleazeball.
Yeah. He's just cool no matter what he does.
Right.
So he follows them where they go parking under the Verrazano Narrow Bridge, and he's watching them. They get into the back seat, and he is, he's just getting closer and closer. And finally, the woman sees him peering in the back seat window, and she freaks out, obviously.
Yeah.
So she's like, we gotta go. Get me out of here. Get me home. And we find out that she has a boyfriend, and they're not even together. They just met, but such is the early '80s in New York City, I guess. And this is one of the most famous scenes in Tom Savini's career. And actually, Movie Phone ranked his best effects that he ever created, and this was number one.
I watched it twice. I rewound it, and I was like, I got to watch that
I did
again.
the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah.
As he turns on the headlights to the car, Frank is standing there with a shotgun, and he jumps up onto the hood of the car and puts the shotgun right into the windshield.
Slow motion. They did this in slow motion, and I thought it was perfect that they did in slow motion.
And he blasts Tom Savini's head with the shotgun, and it shatters, splatters. There's pieces hanging, flapping. The back of the neck is, and like you said, it's slow motion. I watched it probably 5 times. I tried to freeze frame it.
Yeah.
It was spectacular. It was gooey and messy and like, wow.
And that's so cool about Tom Savini is like he's like, hey, I'm on the special effects of this film. Let's have a scene where my head gets blown off.
And
Like, how
so,
cool is that? Like, you get to do that, you know?
well, so the way he got in this movie with the budgetary restrictions were he already had a cast of his own head. So to save them going to make a cast, he gets the role. They use his head and they filled it with fake blood and food and pasta and all kinds of sloppy, messy ingredients. But the final result was just spectacular.
It's perfect. Like I said, I watched it twice. I was like, I gotta watch that. I went back and I'm like slowing it down. I'm like, what a great shot. I mean, to this day, you know, I like that special effect. Put that in a movie now, and I'm satisfied.
It's
Put that in a
over
movie
40
now.
years old.
I don't need CGI. Just do that, and we're good.
And back to the guerrilla filmmaking. So one thing they did with this shot is obviously it's a fake plaster head, but they used a real shotgun. They didn't wire up the triggers. They actually used a real shotgun in the middle of New York City. There was a production assistant parked with his trunk open, and as soon as they shot it, they threw the gun in the trunk, and he drove away. And you read stuff like that, and it's like, these are creative geniuses willing to do anything to get their movie made, and I love it.
They knew what they had. They knew the script. They knew the special effects people. They knew the actors. Like, listen, we're just gonna do this. Like, and it's gonna be worth it. And you know what? Thank God they did. Like, stories like that make me like this movie even more. I'm gonna watch this movie again because just you tell me this stuff, and I'm like, I did not know that.
Yeah, it's insane. And afterwards, he shoots the woman, but it's kind of anticlimactic at this point because of what we just saw with the head. So we hear on the news there's a citywide manhunt for this madman on the loose, and they're warning people. And at night we see Frank handcuff himself to the mannequin in bed, who he's talking to, and he cries himself to sleep.
Is that what he was doing? Crying himself to sleep?
Yeah, it's just like so warped. All the different sides we see of him.
I thought he got a mannequin job.
Yeah,
this whole movie was inappropriate.
The next day at the park, we see kids playing, and one of the girls is riding her bike and runs up to Frank, and he's like right in front of her. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, we're not going there, are we? But he looks around, and Anna, a photographer, is taking pictures. So smart enough to not do anything crazy. And I always wondered, like, what was he going to do something with the girl? You know, you hope not, but you don't know, and it leaves it ambiguous.
It also makes you wonder, like, is he using that as a tactic to lure other adults in, right? Like, hey, do you know what I mean? Like, he's a smart. He comes off as smart. Like, I don't know, was he going to do it? I thought the same thing. When you see the scene, you're like, oh no. But then it's like he sees the girl taking photos, and he's like, bang, that's my in, right? And he kind of like takes off. Yeah.
Well, and reading about it, it says that beauty is something that he has a problem with. Sexual activity, particularly with beauty. So I didn't see how it could have been coincidence. I didn't see how the young girl tied into any of that, but it leaves it very ambiguous. Mm-hmm. But he manages to get the photographer's name and address off her camera bag. So now we like, okay, this woman's in trouble. Mm-hmm. And there's another just terrific character building scene of him looking through closed windows of stores and through like the metal grates where they're closed, and he's just staring at the mannequins, and we just hear him moaning,
and it becomes his signature throughout the whole movie, the moan.
Yeah. It's awful.
It's creepy.
Then we see two nurses leaving work, and one gets in a car and leaves, and the other's walking. Interesting connection. The one that gets in the car and leaves is an adult film star who starred in William Lustig's prior film and got a small role with her clothes on in this one.
Nice. Yeah.
Frank follows the one and is kind of like walking behind her, making her nervous. And she runs into the subway. And I thought this scene was just masterfully done. I know this is a low budget slasher, but when she goes and hides in the subway bathroom, and there's nobody around, and it's late, and it's desolate, and there's no safety, and he's walking towards her, and he gets like close to the edge where he's about to go around the corner, and she's nervous. She can barely contain her breath. And he turns and walks away. And then she's like trying to gather herself. And then finally she slowly moves out into the open, goes to the sink, and she's going to splash cold water on her face. Like, the tension of that scene, I thought was masterful.
I agree. I actually thought this was one of the best, cinematography wise, one of the best parts of the movie. Like when you like when the camera's like facing her, and she's up against the stall, and she's like breathing heavy and like looking to the right, but she can't see anything. But you as the audience can see like what's back there, even though there's nothing, and she's like breathing it. I just thought that was like this doesn't even seem like a 1980s movie. Like, this seems like a ahead of its time type shot. It's very well done. Like you said, the tension just builds and builds and builds, and it's brilliant.
I thought so too. And then, she splashes cold water on her face, looks up, and he's in the mirror behind her, and all that tension paid off. And we get a long blade through the center of the torso. A fairly basic kill for Tom Savini, but well executed. And I just thought that whole scene was brilliant.
Yeah, and it's not just, I mean, it's a basic kill, but it's also, it's something that's still tough to pull off. He could have went with the throat slash. He was like, we're doing enough of that with the scalping. Let's do something different, right? And he kind of has the back penetration, like going through the stomach. Like, so
and you see it pop out the stomach, and it's well done.
Something different. It's something different. Yeah.
And of course, our Frank is a little bit off. He leans on her and he's crying to mommy, but then of course he scalps her. And next we see him show up at Anna's house. And it's very weird because she took pictures of him in the park. He knocks on her door and shows up, and she's like, "Oh, hey, I know you." And she doesn't say like, "Why the heck are you at my front door?" And I guess it was a different world, but it's New York City with everything going on. It just it struck me as off.
It's the most unrealistic part of the movie. But they're also, at the same time, she's very eclectic, right? She's very she's very open-minded. She's an artist, right? So she has this open-minded, no scare. She's just willing to talk to people about her art. So I mean, that's part of the character. That's the type of person that would do that, right?
And the funny thing is, she invites him in, and they sit and they talk. And one of the most unnerving parts of the movie to me was how normal and decent of a conversation they have. Like, he seems like just a regular guy. He invites her to dinner, and she goes with him, and he tells her she's the most beautiful woman he's seen since his mom. And it's like, oh man, here we go.
It pulls a picture out.
He says he wants to see her again, and it's like, he's not a devilishly handsome fella, and she's a pretty woman. So but she's like so nice and open. She invites him to her next photo shoot, which she's shooting women. So you know how he has an issue with beauty and so forth.
And he's pretending to be a painter. He's told her, "I'm a painter. I do painting. So I'm an artist like you." And he actually has intelligent conversation with her. To actually having a real deep conversation about like possessing beauty, which is kind of the core of his issue. And so she's like interested with this philosophy of like painting and art. And so they have this little connection that she's piqued by.
Yeah, I tell you, him being a psycho didn't bother me as much as him being so straight and normal in that conversation. It was,
but that was him being a psycho.
I know.
Like,
I know,
to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, it was good. He's watching her photograph these women, and he steals a woman named Rita. He steals her necklace and leaves. And that night he shows up at Rita's house to bring her lost necklace. And of course, that's not why he's there. He attacks her, and unlike the other women who he's just killed instantly, he ties her to a bed and has a conversation with her as if she is his mom.
Yeah.
And he says he's going to keep her. Like, I'm going to keep you. I'm going to keep you this time. And then he just sticks a knife through her chest.
Yeah. It's very psychotic conversation.
Very. And of course he scalps her and leaves. And we keep seeing mannequins in his apartment, and they're plastic, and they got the scalp on them, and we see the dried blood from the scalp on them, and each mannequin keeps getting a new scalp, and it's just it's just snowballing like crazy.
It's impressive how psychotic this movie is.
He invites Anna to a show, and on the way Of course, she goes. She likes him. So on the way to the show, he asks if she minds if they stop at his mom's grave. It's Christmas time, and he wants to leave a wreath. And once they get into the cemetery, he attacks Anna. But she manages to get away and run. And this was one of the parts of the movie I didn't think was that well executed. I wrote down they had a low-speed chase through the cemetery. They keep showing them, and neither one of them's running very fast.
Right. Yeah. That's. Yeah.
He comes around a tombstone, and she hits him with a shovel with a really nice slicing his shoulder open effect. And she takes off, and he reacts very oddly to being hurt. He cries and screams for his mother, which I guess that isn't that odd for him.
Right. It's in character.
We hear a voice, his mother's voice, telling him he must be punished, and he has a couple childhood flashbacks. And we see him now. He's returned to his mother's grave, and he hallucinates his dead mom, almost zombie form, coming up through the ground and pulling him down. But
which is a cool special effect. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, it was a cool. Tom Savini can throw a zombie in anywhere he wants.
Tom Savini can do it all. Yeah.
He staggers home, kind of whimpering and holding his injury, and now he's in his room surrounded by bloody mannequins, and he lies down, and he imagines they all come to life. All the mannequins are now his victims. They're all the women he killed and put their scalps on. And they surround his bed and they attack him. They cut off his arm, they stab him, and finally they are pulling on him, and they pull his head completely from his body.
Very Day of the Deadish, right? That type scene. He's a master of that scene.
Yeah, well, you can see in 5 years he perfected it, because
he got way better. Yeah.
It was way better in Day of the Dead than it was here, but it was still cool.
Yeah.
The next day the police come. Anna must have alerted them to, this guy is the creeper. The police come to his place and they find him dead, apparently at his own hands. It looks like he stabbed himself in the middle. His head is still attached. His arm is not missing. And they say, oh, he's a goner. And as the camera slowly zooms in on his dead face, the last frame is his eyes shoot wide open.
Yeah.
Which was typical of the time, where you had to have an ambiguous ending for sequels and for different things that could come up.
Yeah. But it adds to how crazy the movie is too.
It does. Yeah. Again, this reputation was really poor when it came out. It's just a gross sleaze fest, and it's really deserves reevaluation, and it really is an interesting movie. And it's not a basic slasher by any means. There's some psychology, and the acting's really, really fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic. You really buy into all of the characters. I think they all played it very well. A very, very low budget movie. And like you said, the main actor, it was Joe Spinell. Like he just phenomenal, because you actually believe it, but he plays multiple, he wears multiple masks, right? Throughout the movie, he plays this little psychotic guy that's crying, and then he's evil, and then he's also having dinner with a woman, and he's able to play all these roles and just kind of make this character believable.
Yeah, very believable. Okay, excellent. Our next film in the Tom Savini Kills catalog, we're going to go to 1985 to Day of the Dead, directed by George A. Romero, and it's the final chapter of the original Dead trilogy that Romero was so famous for, probably his crowning achievement, despite all the great movies he made. And this movie is, if you're a fan of The Walking Dead, the DNA ties directly to this film. In fact, there's an early scene with a newspaper where the headline, as the newspaper flies across this empty city street, the headline is "The Dead Walk." Also in this movie, as an actor and a special effects assistant, is Greg Nicotero, who went on to do the effects and be one of the producers of The Walking Dead. And furthermore,
that makes sense, because when you see this movie, you see Walking Dead shots
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Furthermore, the main zombie of this film, Bub, the one that the scientist is trying to domesticate, actually has a cameo in season 3, episode 14 of The Walking Dead.
That's awesome.
Bub is there. So if you're a fan of The Walking Dead, and I know, again, this movie is almost 40 years old, but you can draw a lot of straight lines from this movie to that.
The people that came up with the Walking Dead comic originally, it was originally a comic and then transformed into a franchise. They clearly watched this movie growing up and like, yeah, we want to do that. You know, you're like, it's, and there's nothing, I mean, that's homage, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Yeah. The movie starts with Sarah has a daydream, and a really cool scene of she's in like a concrete cinder block room, and all at once she's looking at a calendar, and all at once 30 zombie arms poke through the wall, almost like it's paper. It probably must have been paper to pull this off. And then she snaps to, and it was a daydream.
Mm-hmm.
And she's actually in an expedition in a helicopter, and they're out looking for survivors. Sarah's the scientist. Miguel is a military man, and he's her boyfriend. Bill is the radio guy, and John is the pilot. And those are the 4 people out looking.
It's a classic, like Dead series type setup, you know. You get the
And I thought, they land, and they're going to check a city, and the streets are completely empty. And Miguel's with the megaphone, and he's yelling and asking if there's anybody there. And we see.
And years later, this is completely off topic, but I couldn't help it. I forgot. There's a band called the Gorillaz, and they have in one of the albums, they start their album off with that bit of hello. They start their album off with just that. And I when I was watching it, I was like, it just immediately reminded. But that's how important this movie is, right? It transcended into music.
Yeah. There's, if you look at the the cultural references on this movie, they're vast. In several forms of music, and certainly in further movies and TV shows.
Yeah, art form everywhere. Yeah.
And this movie was considered the weakest of the trilogy at the time of its release because Night of the Living Dead was so groundbreaking. Dawn of the Dead was considered, the best zombie movie ever made. But upon reflection, I think this movie got a little underrated at the time, and has really been brought into higher esteem. The effects are fantastic. And Romero, it was his personal favorite of the 3. He really liked the story, and he called it which I thought was an interesting, his description of it. This is a tragedy about lack of communication between people, causing chaos and collapse, even in a small little slice of society.
Operational ineptitudes. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I actually liked Captain Rhodes. Like, I think like there are points when the actor, like, it's almost Al Pacino-esque, like the way he's yelling at people, and like it, like he really gave it his all. You can tell it's actually really good acting. Like, I thought this is a good movie.
Yeah, it's a classic.
It's a classic.
So they megaphone through the streets, and in another, you think of the opening of 28 Days Later, where Cillian Murphy walks out to the empty streets of London, which is a phenomenal scene. This is a smaller city, but we kind of get the same shot where there's just empty streets. But with the megaphone going on, it quickly fills up with dead, and they're coming out of. It looks like nobody's around, and all of a sudden the streets are full. It's like, where'd they all come from?
Yeah.
So that's a cool, and again, that's very typical of a Dead, setup intro. So they take off back to the compound. It's a scientific research facility with a joint military, operation going on, and they are completely underground and use an elevator platform to get in and out of the facility.
Yeah, I think it's 14 miles of tunnel down there or something like that. They say at one point. Yeah.
So Miguel seems to have some form of PTSD. He's starting to come unraveled, but goes on a dangerous job to collect dead from a holding pit. There's like this long tunnel, and they have a bunch of zombies in there that they use for these scientific experiments, and they have to go corral a couple. He's struggling and starting to fail on the job, which is very unsafe. And Sarah interferes on his behalf, and he's very upset about that. the two groups, the scientists and the military, are in conflict, and the tensions are rising in the facility. Captain Rhodes, that you mentioned, is newly in charge, and he's cracking down hard, and he's playing a real, like, almost a psycho kind of out of control, yelling, screaming kind of, military leader guy.
Yeah, and to the character's point, when you're watching the movie, like it comes off as a bad guy, but when you think about it, like how else are people supposed to act in this situation? Do you know what I mean? Like it's almost like I think there's a part of me that was like, this guy's right. Like we should be cracking down on all this. You know what I mean? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
There's zombies everywhere. I'm trying to preserve what we have. You know what I mean? I kind of I like sympathize with the character a little bit when I'm watching the movie.
Yeah, and it's particularly, Dr. Logan is the head scientist, and the military calls him Dr. Frankenstein, and he's experimenting on zombie brains, and his plan and what he's working towards is to try and control them and tame them and domesticate them. And he does some morally questionable things through the course of his work that we find gets worse and worse. And here's my first highlighted Tom Savini effect. There's a zombie in his lab on a gurney, and he's strapped down, and he's all ripped open, and his guts are all exposed, and the strap breaks, and he turns sideways, and his entire body cavity of guts slop out onto the floor with a wet splat, and it was just awesome.
It's so simple. It's just a simple effect of like tipping a casket, right? I mean, they filled something up, and it's such a basic effect, but it works.
It was almost shocking the first time you see it. Like, oh my God, that many guts just fell out. It was cool.
Yeah, yeah. The special effects are absolutely top notch in this movie. You watch it and you're like, this is it. This is what we need.
Yeah, and because they did so many zombies, and there's scenes with dozens and dozens of zombies, and this is why Tom brought in Greg Nicotero and Howard Berger, who went on to be two of the three members of KNB Effects, which kind of took the mantle from Tom and became like the special effects company to go to, all the way up to Nicotero working on The Walking Dead. So,
right.
I love that he's, an educator and a teacher and a mentor, and really passes the baton. I think that just speaks to, the character that he shows.
Absolutely. I mean, these individuals could have kept this stuff for themselves and like, nope, magician never reveals the secrets, and we're just going to keep this, and you guys figure it out. This is you're not eating our lunch. Like, this is our thing, right? No, they went and taught everyone this is how it's done, and just kind of helped flourish the business. I love that.
And Tom even put out two books, the Grand Illusion and Grand Illusion 2, which are almost like textbooks of documented examples of how to perform certain special effects.
I have to get those books, and I'll have to talk to you about that later.
They're very hard to find.
Books, yeah.
They're very expensive, but it's just
like,
and then he goes on
like
to create
$750 textbooks, something like
that. Not that bad, but
no,
they're
expensive though.
They're expensive, yeah. But it's just out there. Like, hey, here's what you got to do, and he learned under Dick Smith. And in fact, he credits Dick Smith with giving him the proper formula for blood. I love Dawn of the Dead, but if you look at the blood in it, it's very bright. It's very Kool-Aid looking. It doesn't look right, and you can see over even Martin when there's bloodshed in Martin, it's very bright red.
Yeah,
you can see him evolve to a more realistic, more
it's more runny. It doesn't. It wasn't. It had this like red coagulated look to it, like it was like a gel. Almost. Yeah, it's just. Yeah.
They have Rhodes calls a group meeting, wants everybody in there, and it's a lot of screaming and yelling, and he wants to see results from the scientists, or he's pulling the plug, and we're getting out of here. And Logan, Dr. Frankenstein, says to him, "Well, where will you go?
Where are you gonna go?
Yeah. There's probably people in Washington, but
what's your game plan? I have one.
There's no people out
I'm
here.
working on things. Yeah.
And his game plan right from the get-go to me was a little nuts. But we see
Frankenstein. It's his game plan is out of his mind. Like he thinks he's going to teach civility to. He's trying to reverse, and he's a scientist, right?
Yeah.
And so he's thinking scientifically. How do we reverse engineer this and get life back to normal? Like, is that possible?
But it's
So
funny.
I understand scientifically what he's trying to do.
I do as well, but it's funny. He specifically tells him you don't have enough ammunition. You know, we're outnumbered 300,000 to 1.
You could teach all of these. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
that same equation would apply to his domestication process.
Yeah, you got to train them all. Like, how
You're
long
gonna
does it
train
take?
300,000 to 1?
And then how long does that take? Right. Yeah.
Right. So it's, you know, he's got all these facts and scientific outlook, and I feel like he's completely missing the boat on this one.
Well, you know, oftentimes when people are obsessed with things, they do miss the bigger picture because they're honed in on one thing. And he's obsessed with this equation of trying to do it, and he's not thinking of the bigger picture.
Yeah. Sarah has another one of her daydreams with Miguel, who she had given a sedative to that he didn't want. She daydreams him, you know, turning sideways in bed and his guts falling out like the zombie we saw.
Yeah,
and
yeah, right.
she quickly wakes up and it's just another daydream. And they fight over, you know, from his perspective, she made him look bad in front of his military counterparts. And
Right.
she's like, I was trying to help you. They fight over it. She says, fine, just get out. So through their breakup, she kind of goes out for a walk and stumbles into some rowdy military guys like tussling. And Bill, the radio guy, grabs her and pulls her to safety. And she goes on a long walk with him. And we find out that Bill and John, since they're neither scientists or military, they actually stay way out in this facility in a camper. And they got a really cool setup in the backyard where they have it like a back lawn and lawn chairs and lights. And they just relax out there. And
Yeah.
Sarah goes out and joins them. And, you know, they have some drinks. And they say, you know, both your perspectives are crazy. We should be flying away to an island where we're safe and enjoying the time we have left and maybe starting over, maybe having kids.
Yeah.
And
yeah, and he brings up a real intellectual. It's very intellectual. He's talking about how it's you know, maybe it's very Tower of Babel, right? He's like, maybe God saw us like getting to this point where we were going to blow a hole in the earth, and he was like, not on my watch. Like, I'm going to reset all this. Very very like Noah. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to wash the world of all this, and he's taking a very biblical approach to it. Like, what do we know? You know, we tampered with science long enough, and God was like, you know,
Yeah.
like, I'm going to reset all this. It's a very interesting conversation that they have.
and I to me, he's the person that made the most sense, right? Because I've always said, zombie apocalypse, what do? Get as much guns and ammo and food as possible and go to an island.
Go on an island. Yep.
So, you know, the military perspective, you know, we're going to kill them all, and the scientists, we're going to train them all. He's the guy that makes sense to me. I'm like, I'm with
Well,
him.
the scientist said it in the beginning. He was like, if we were going to kill them all, we would have done that in the beginning. They overran us,
Yes.
right? And I was like, that's a good point.
It's
right?
too late. It's too late
yeah.
now.
Because
The
you really
numbers
you
are
think,
not in our favor.
I always think about the zombie apocalypse in real life, and I'm like, it'd be over in 3 days. I think we'd wipe them all out in 3 days. We have enough. Every country has enough. You know, like, I think it would end fat, but whatever.
Back in the lab, Logan shows Sarah Bub, the infamous Bub, his star pupil. And he's got him chained to a wall, and he's giving him everyday items to see if he recognizes them and can assimilate to them. And he picks up a razor, and he simulates shaving with it, actually kind of slicing his own zombie flesh a little bit, which was a subtle but cool effect.
I actually thought they were going to go more when I was watching it. Like, I mean, I saw this movie when I was younger, so it's been years since I've seen this movie, and I for some reason when I watched it, I thought it was going to be more flesh, and I think I had a weird memory about it, but I was like, wasn't there like a thing where he took his face off? But I guess it didn't happen.
Just some little slices,
Just a little bit. Yeah, and my memory was different. Yeah.
There's a book. He picks up the book. It's Salem's Lot by Stephen King.
Yeah.
Which was nice. They had just finished Creepshow a couple years prior and had a good relationship, so give him a little nod there.
That's right. Yeah, good little Easter egg right there. Yeah.
Yep. And he actually gives him a phone, and he picks it up like he knows what to do with it. And then Rhodes comes in, and Bub salutes him. And the doctor's like, well, salute him back. And he's like, you want me to salute this bag of pus? Because he's always angry. His character's just always angry.
Yeah.
And they actually give him a gun with the bullets out. They hand him a gun, and he points it and pulls the trigger. Of course, nothing happens, but it's like
he was going to shoot him.
He does have memory of his life before, and that was it's kind of the first time that we were allowed to believe there was something more going on there.
Yeah.
So Rhodes is not impressed, of course. He's like, this is what you're working on?
Right. These guys would kill us. You're just going to train them to kill us? Like,
the military goes out to corral more dead for Logan, and Miguel loses control again, and one gets loose and chaos ensues. One guy gets a really, really beautifully done throat torn out. It's just ripped, and the flesh is stretchy.
You get the stretchiness to it. Yeah.
And he's screaming, and the blood's pouring. It's really, really well done. Another guy gets actually Greg Nicotero gets shot in the melee that ensues, and Miguel gets bit on the arm, and Sarah grabs John's machete. And
this is one of my favorites, Tom Savini special effects of the movie. I know there's a lot of cool ones, but the reason I like this one so much is because you see the actor, you see him acting, and then you have the arm, and you're like, wait, you can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Like it's a magician's move. I love it.
Yeah, and it's a move, used later in The Walking Dead. When Herschel gets his leg bit, Rick quickly cuts his leg off. It's the same exact move.
Yeah. And there's no cutaway. Like, they're showing it because it's a prop, right?
And what I like about it, everything you said, he's laying there, his arm's sticking out. She hacks it with the machete, but it doesn't go all the way through. And she's kind of working it down, pushing down, and grinding it to the concrete, and then sweeps it away. This severed arm, and it's those little nuances take it above just a great effect. It's a great effect that's executed perfectly.
Well, how many takes did they have? They might have been like, listen, we got one take, do this. Like, we can maybe do it twice if we set up the prop again for 6 hours, right? You don't have so it's like, all right, just film her doing it, and she's struggling. That's really her struggling. It's great film.
Yeah, and it's realistic. I know we're talking about a zombie movie, but
we're talking about great special effects.
The reason his effects are so great is because they're realistic.
Yes,
it's what you would envision happening, whether it's real people or not real people.
Yeah, it's not only just not only the realistic effects, but it's throwing an actor in there and saying, just go with it. Just go. It's might be a struggle. We're gonna film it. Yeah.
Sarah, of course, has to cauterize his arm with fire, and it's just brutal. And then there's a standoff between Sarah's group and the military group, and they said, they blame him for what happened at the corral because he let the one go, and they said he's bit and infected, and they're going to shoot him. And Sarah's like, no, I got it cut off in time. And they're like, well, how would you know? And then they agree he's going to stay out at the camper with them. So we really have drawn lines between our groups here, and it's getting worse, this tension. Rhodes says they're going to kill all the zombies out of the corral in the morning, and there's going to be no more for scientific purposes. And it's really, everything's coming to a head.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah and Bill decide they need to go for morphine for Miguel. They got to go back to the lab. Inside the lab, they find Greg Nicotero's, the dead soldier's head. And they find a recording that Logan has made, and he's just rambling. And it's like, okay, he's gone.
Yeah, there's like,
thought he was fruity. He's really fruity.
Yeah.
And Bill again suggests they fly away. We got to get out of here. The light comes on in the lab next door, and they see Logan teaching Bub how to use a tape player. I don't want to get carried away here, but the actor that played Bub, there's certain scenes with his facial expressions and his, sometimes he's sad and sometimes he's curious. It actually made me think of Karloff as Frankenstein. with a wordless portrayal of a emotions in a monster. And I'm not saying it was that good, but it made me think of it.
I thought the same exact thing. I'm not kidding. Like I thought the same exact thing. It made me think of the old 1930s Frankenstein. Yes, 100%.
So Bub learns how to use the tape player, and he learns how to push it on and push it off, and he's got headphones on, and his reaction when the music comes is just like is really good. Yeah. But then we see the second part of the training is Logan has to reward him for doing good, and he gives him a bucket of body parts, and we just saw the soldier's head on the table, and we're envisioning he's crossed those moral lines. And if another soldier knows what's going on with their fallen brother, it's not going to be pretty.
Right. I mean, none of this would pass an ethics committee.
Right. I mean, the world's falling apart.
Right.
And we talk about
they're just doing whatever. Yeah.
One of the things this movie made me think of was Lord of the Flies. When you remove societal norms and you remove any structure, things just come unraveled.
Which is interesting because Logan has a really good speech when he's talking to Captain Rhodes. He's like, if we don't reward their good behavior for being civil, what's the point in having civility? And it's actually a really good point about society, right? If we don't reward civility, then we don't have civility. And if we don't have civility, everything collapses. And so he knows this. So, right. So he's aware of this, but then also doing all of these unethical practices in order to achieve his higher means. And it's a conflict, right? Mm-hmm. It's part of the conflict that George Romero was brilliant at bringing to film.
Yeah. Rhodes, of course, arrives right as this is going on, and him and his crew go nuts, and they kill Logan and they capture the others. There's another scientist that has kind of a minor role. There's Logan, there's Sarah, and there's one more scientist.
His assistants, yeah.
Yeah. And, John had left to go because Bill and Sarah hadn't come back. John had left to go find them, and they kind of all come together at once. And there's this, Rhodes kills Logan, shoots him dead. And then he grabs the others, and he's like, oh, we're done with this. And he tells John, you're flying us out of here. And he's like, the chopper won't hold all of us. He goes, I didn't say all of us. He's like, you're flying us out of here, and I'm done with these guys. And he sends Sarah and Bill into the tunnel that holds the zombies, puts them through the corral and shuts them in.
Yep.
And meanwhile, Miguel had been left alone, and he was out, but he comes to, and he goes up and he gets on the platform and goes outside. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. What's he doing? Meanwhile, Bub gets loose, and he's wandering the halls, and Bill and Sarah get attacked by zombies because they're kind of helpless in there, and they fight back. And in one of a scene that we'll highlight here, a very famous effect is Bill puts a shovel right through the middle of a zombie's head, right above the mouth, and he puts it through, and he flicks it across the room, across the tunnel that they're in.
Yeah, it goes bloop, bloop, bloop.
And the eyes, the head is moving, the eyes are animated, and after he chops it, and the eyes are still moving. It's awesome.
When I watched that, I had to rewind it and I had to think about it. And what I think they did was they had an upside down mask prop, and someone's regular head was in there, like looking around, but the head was upside down, and I don't know how they did it.
It might have been animatronics. I don't know.
But
the eyes moving. The cut in the head where they cut it was like unique. Usually see a head cut off the neck, right in the middle of the actual head, and then kind of flicked away with the shovel. And then the eyes are still moving when it gets to the other side of the tunnel. It's just awesome.
Still impressive to this day. I'm watching. I'm like, that's still impressive. Like movies need to just go back. Like I know it's expensive probably, but you can't. Tom Savini just does it again, right?
Yeah. Back inside, John knocks out Rhodes and takes all of his guns and goes after Sarah and Bill. We go back up top and we see Miguel, and he opens the outer fence where there's zombies all collected around, very reminiscent of the prison of in The Walking Dead.
Yeah,
Like,
reminiscent.
almost exactly the same. Yeah.
Right.
He goes and sits on the platform with the remote control in his hand, and he gets swarmed.
He takes his chains and bites them because he
Yep, he's
doesn't want
holding them,
for the pain. Yeah.
and they tear a chunk out of his chest, and they're just pulling parts of him away, very, very bloody and stretchy and goopy. And before he dies, he hits the button, and the platform goes down, and the platform lowers, and it's just full of the dead.
Yeah.
And now it's inside the complex.
It's an iconic scene. I mean,
My favorite part is it's lowering down, and you have all these confused zombies just kind of looking around.
one falls.
And one falls. One's like a little too early and just falls on the ground and like slowly gets up.
I wonder if that was a blooper or if someone said, you know what, this is my one chance to be in this movie. I'm taking a fall.
If it was, it should have stayed because it's great in the movie.
It's perfect. It's funny. Yeah.
So now our soldiers are surrounded by zombies, and this is another one of my favorite effects. There's a scene where a guy is ripped at the throat, right? Which we've seen similar versions, but as he's pulled, his head's almost pulled like a bowling ball.
Yeah,
we see his vocal cords stretch and rip, and we hear his
sound
voice change as the vocal cords are stretched. And I just thought the attention to detail on that, you're hacking people up all over the place, but you take the time to make sure that you get those little nuances right, and it was so good.
Even though it had that like 80s like synthetic sound to it, do you know what I mean? Like it wasn't obviously a human scale. Like they changed the voice the best they could, and it, like you said, it's noticeable. Like as his head's being pulled back, the scream changes, and it's very noticeable. Like you said, the attention to detail is phenomenal.
Another soldier has their face just pulled off.
With the eyes coming out, like
it comes out yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
One of our main soldiers, he's been kind of Rhodes' right-hand man. He's a bully, Steele. He gets bit in the arm, and he kills himself before he can be eaten. Saying about callback, when he sat down and put the gun to his head, I think he's out of bullets. Like I thought he failed, but then he wasn't out of bullets, and he did.
I thought it would have been funny if it went click.
Yeah, but no, he kills himself before he can get ripped apart.
Because I don't think Tom Savini wants to waste a kill. He's like, no, I want to do the back headshot. Like, let me do this.
Always a classic.
Right.
Through the tunnels, Sarah, John, and Bill have reunited, and they fought off, and they find a long, tall ladder up to the surface, and they start to head up. Bub, meanwhile, is wandering around, and he's picked up the guns of the dead soldier, and he's looking for Rhodes, and he finds him. And first he shoots him in the back, and Rhodes staggers away, and he's screaming at him, and he's swearing at him. And then he gets to a door, and as he gets the door open, he turns around, and Bub shoots him in the stomach or in the chest. And inside the door is just a wall of zombies that he falls to.
Yeah.
And this
look on his face.
Yeah, this scene was number 2 on the list of all-time Tom Savini special effects put together by Moviefone. Rhodes' body is it's almost like a drawn and quartered type of situation. He's pulled, well alive and screaming. His whole body is pulled in half, and his lower torso is dragged away with his guts straggling through the middle. And he's screaming while it's happening, and it's really, really well done.
What's that name he's saying? He was saying some name, or he's saying something, but he was like screaming it. But yeah, the zombies are pulling the legs away, and you can see them walking with him down the corridor. Like you're never getting these again, pal. You never seen that again.
Yeah,
and he has to watch it,
and he's still alive to witness it.
He's watching it. Yeah,
yeah, and then they all start feasting on his innards. They're just pulling him out, and they're if you follow,
it's an absolutely insane scene. Like
it is. But if you follow they're feasting on innards in Night of the Living Dead. They're feasting on innards in Dawn of the Dead. These innards are more realistic. Like the effects have just gotten better.
They did.
They're real.
They have that
looking,
whole.
They're wet. They're messy. They're disgusting.
Yeah, they have a montage of them all just like feasting on them, and it almost reminds me of that one scene that they had of the carnage in Event Horizon, where they show that for like 20 seconds of the carnage, and it made me think like, oh, that's where the inspiration I think came from this movie, because you have these like little you have these that little montage of all the zombies like trying to like eat all the food, and they're just kind of like taking people's hands and feet and guts, and they're fighting over it, and it's just absolute carnage, especially in 1985.
Yeah.
I don't know how often they had this kind of stuff, but I mean, it seems like this was like revolutionary.
Yeah, and that's when this came out, it wasn't as greatly reviewed as the others, but the one thing that was always given accolades was the groundbreaking effects.
Yeah,
and it deserved it.
Yeah, it's still impressive to this day.
Sarah, John, and Bill do make it to the chopper. Sarah opens the door to the chopper, and a zombie comes out at her, and we snap, and that was just a daydream. She wakes up, and she's on the beach of an island with the others. So they got away.
They got to their
did
island.
what I think they should have done in the first place, is go to an island and enjoy what time you have left.
Yeah.
But it's a classic zombie movie, and whether wherever you rank it in the zombie movies doesn't really matter. What matters is the effects in this movie changed everything going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I couldn't have said it any better. Doesn't matter where you rank it. You watch this movie and you look at these effects, and you have to show me something better, right? Like, I mean, it changed the game.
Yeah, for sure. And these are the reasons why we have such admiration and appreciation for the great Tom Savini.
The great and powerful Tom Savini.
So, all right. Well, that is our show for this week. Again, love tackling a subject like this. Somebody that we enjoy their works. We admire what they brought to the films that we love. So, a pleasure to talk about Tom and his work. And that's our episode for this week. So, we are the Weekly Horoscope. I'm Jerry, that's Matt, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your Weekly Horoscope with Jerry and Matt.